Of a World Crisis Radio. This is your host, Webster Tarpley, speaking to you from Washington, D.C. And here on the banks of the Potomac, we had a light dusting of snow overnight, but it's likely that this thin film of snow will be overtaken by rain, and that will go on through the evening. So it's rather dismal weather. Well, we still have 3 more weeks of winter here on the banks of the Potomac. But let's focus our attention on the twin debacles of the Trump regime. This was another bad week for Trump. And whatever else we can say, we are now 1 week closer to the end of the Trump regime. Lots of speculation. Will he make it to the full 4 years? Will he be able to compete in 2020? As we know, Elizabeth Warren said we don't know if he'll still be occupying the Oval, and we don't know if he will still be at large. In other words, free on his own recognizance, or even, I would add, what country he'll be in, because there's always the path of diplomatic asylum and political asylum in some other place. So let's start with the double whammy. The double whammy is, first of all, Kim, the DPRK, North Korea. And then we'll go on to the Michael Cohen testimony, which we have discussed in detail on the daily broadcast, right, which we always commend to you, your kind attention, that you should join the podcast over at The American System. That's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And we're here on Friday, right? I'm speaking to you now on the afternoon of Friday, March 1st. It's getting to be 3 to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Stock market closing in 3/4 of an hour, give or take. And this is the update that we have at this point. So let's go, first of all, into the Hanoi summit. Now, the Hanoi summit was, of course, programmed in advance to fail, because any serious summitry involves deals, treaties, executive agreements, written texts that are, if not signed in advance, which is better. If you can get it signed in advance and sign it in advance yourself, that's better. Or at least initialed in advance. I've seen this, and yes, this is more or less what we have in mind. So what we have then is, since Trump, as a dilettante, right, as an incurable amateur and an egomaniac, a narcissist who thinks that his own skills of psychological manipulation, some would say animal magnetism, right? This is the expression used by Freemasons, right? Freemasons, if you've ever had to deal with them, they want to sit you down and then try to have a staring contest, and they want to somehow overwhelm your will with theirs, and they communicate this through these typical Freemasonic methods. Maybe Trump has got some background with that, but he always thinks that by schmoozing and by his skills of suasion and his ability to read the room and to read the counterpart, that he can always manipulate somebody more successfully than they can manipulate him. And of course, it is an abject failure. Of course, it's worse, much worse than an abject failure, as we will try to show, the U.S. position in the Far East vis-a-vis a hostile China and an equally hostile or more hostile Russian Federation, as well as a ravingly hostile North Korea under the leadership of Madman Kim, or Mad Dog Kim, if you prefer. This whole constellation is no place for amateurs, and amateur is what you have with Trump. And of course, he's an amateur drunk with his own self-importance and completely deluded about his own effectiveness. So the idea was have a summit, and you could see it with Trump, right? He said, I took it on the chin in the fall election in November. I was defeated. Then I wanted my wall, couldn't get it, had to shut down the government, defeated on that. Now it's going into the courts, probably defeated or at least stalemated on those things. Therefore, I've got to try to rack up some foreign policy events. Now, of course, the parallel is eerie. It is eerily similar to one Richard Milhous Nixon in the 1973-74 period when, since he was blocked, checkmated on at every step of the way in domestic politics, he decided to take his act on the road and started visiting all kinds of countries. It was really a poor foreign minister who couldn't get a visit by the U.S. president in those days. So that's what Trump is doing, he's trying to play the president, right? Act the part of the president on the world stage. So there should have been preparation. Remember, the goal of all this at the beginning, coming out of the mouths of these creatures, Pomposo here, and Bolton, warmongers both, was that they wanted the complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization of North Korea. CVID. CVID. Doesn't quite work as Roman numerals, but it looks suitably Roman imperial. So CVID they are not going to get. Already before this summit, so-called summit, started, we had these leaks, NBC had it and others, that the U.S. had given up on the most basic demand. The most basic demand was an inventory. How many missiles do you have? How many nuclear warheads do you have? Do you have any nuclear bombs? What other nuclear devices do you have? Where are they produced? Where are they stored? Where are your laboratories? What's your nuclear program? Put it on paper and hand it across the table. That would have been an important step, a serious step towards denuclearization. It's clear that little Kim, Mad Dog Kim, had no intention of ever doing this, right? That this was going to be the 99th ad nauseam repetition of the North Korean two-step or four-step or whatever it is. Quick step? No, it's usually a fairly slow foxtrot by these North Korean schemers. So the U.S. had signaled, however, weakness in advance. Weakness in advance. Oh, we really don't need that inventory. Of course, you need the inventory before you can do literally anything else. All right. So then we get down to the meetings. What's happening on the Tuesday to the Wednesday there in Hanoi. Cadet Bone Spurs is on the scene for the first time. And what's the proposal coming from Kim? So Kim and his entourage say, well, there's this Young Bong, I think it's B-O-N-G, huh? And you can make of that what you will. They said, okay, look, we'll take our oldest Young Bong. We'll take down our oldest nuclear facility. How about that? And in exchange, you lift all economic sanctions. All. They're trying to deny that. That's what they wanted. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. It's, as we say, the afternoon of March 1st, 2 months already gone. Interesting phenomenon of the acceleration of time in a crisis like this, right? Goes back to reports first registered at the time of the French Revolution, that after long periods of relative inactivity, frenetic activity, dramatic, quick changes, hectic activity seems to make the individual, the subjective experience of time is that it's going faster, and that recent events are further in the past than they actually are. This is often commented on the various cable stations. All right. So the U.S. gives up the ranch in advance. Oh, don't bother. We won't demand an actual list of your nuclear program. You don't have to declare anything. So at that point, it looks to me like little Kim got too big for his britches and decided that he could go for a home run instead of being satisfied with a double or a few runs batted in. And no, he wanted all sanctions lifted in exchange for shutting down, opening up, and dismantling the Yongbyon, Y-O-N-G-B-Y-O-N, yes, Y-O-N-G-B-Y-O-N nuclear facility. And Trump said no. Look, there was a period, it was actually very interesting that night, and I can go back in my notes, and I actually did reconstruct this on the daily program, that you could see by the time it got to be midnight, something was going wrong. By 12:30 in the evening, the TV was promising, well, they're scheduled, because they have all the correspondence out there, for this nothing burger, actually a debacle, right? Actually a very serious event. It's not nothing. It's worse than, much worse than doing nothing. So it got to be, well, by 1 o'clock in the morning, the word was no deal. They're going home. Kim will not make any more appearances. No working lunch. No joint press conference. Trump will have his press conference sooner than planned, which he did then at about 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we are here. And that was then his press conference. So there's a failure. The summit collapsed. It's a debacle. It's, from the diplomatic point of view, it's catastrophic, because you could have worked on something in advance that would have been a face-saving document that they could have signed, right? We're committed to continuing here. Before too long, we will know what actually occurred with a certain amount of granular detail. But right now, we don't know that much. But we know the main stuff. There is no deal. Kim escalated his extortion demands beyond all reason, because this is extortion. He says, "I have nukes. Pay me," in effect, right? It's completely humiliating from that point of view, right? But Trump doesn't care. Trump has no idea of honor. Trump has no idea of even dignity. He's just a hooligan, and he's anxious. He's eager for gain, and there's no notion of dignity or seriousness that or something degrading. No. He'll do all of that if he thinks it'll help him with his backward followers. So Trump had his press conference. We did a review of the press conference on the Thursday show. Go there, please. Join the podcast. Listen to that. Listen to the whole coverage, for that matter. But the other question is, once this was finished with, once it was clear that the summit was through, Kim was going to stay for a state visit to Vietnam for his own purposes. Cadet Bonespurs was going to rush home. And the question left hanging was the drills, the exercises. We're talking about a series which has been known in recent years as Ulchi Freedom Guardian. The Ulchi is the Korean side of it, U-L-C-H-I. Ulchi Freedom Guardian was canceled last year. by Trump, unilaterally and without preparation, hip shot, because apparently Trump was told by Putin to do it. Right? Trump said, I did it because Vladimir told me that's what I should do. So, again, the language of puppetry on the world stage, right? A strategic puppet is what we seem to be dealing with. So, now the question was, after this summit, given the meager, scanty, non-existent, humiliating results, would Trump resume the drills? Now, what we have from today, just in the last couple of hours, we are told by the Pentagon that Ulchi Freedom Guardian 19 is canceled, called off, will not occur. These drills are indispensable. We have to have the cooperation of the U.S. forces with the Republic of Korea ROK forces in the demilitarized zone area, in the Seoul area, all over the country. We need to have coordination with air assets coming in from Guam and other places in the Pacific. There are air bases in Japan that can be drawn on and so forth. So it is simply indispensable. Anybody who says this is not important is simply a fool. Even General Keane, a warmonger, appearing on Fox News, who normally carries water for Trump in every way that he can, went out of his way to say, look, any professional military guy will tell you these drills are simply indispensable. And if you don't have preparedness, you don't have drills, you don't have any defense. Trump, however, at this point had already shifted gears into this lunatic, nickel nurser, penny pincher, penny wise, pound foolish mode that he has, saying, oh, these drills are really expensive. You got to fly those planes all the way from Guam. The bombs are expensive. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. Well, as somebody even pointed out on Fox News, if you don't do this, you might lose your whole investment, meaning your entire army of 40,000 U.S. troops that are there, your fleet assets, your air assets. Maybe Kim will just destroy all of them because you're not ready. The motto of these people in Korea has long been, fight tonight. In other words, be ready to fight at any time, at night, at dawn, in the late afternoon, Sunday morning. Webster Topley here in Washington, D.C. So remember, in passing, that at the Pentagon, we have this nonentity so far, Secretary Shanahan, who's the acting Secretary of Defense. He's a former Boeing executive. He wants that job. Shanahan is busy writing up an opinion saying, for the defense of the southern border of the United States, a wall is indispensable, right? Shanahan's new Maginot Line. Maybe we'll call it the Shanahan Line in honor of him. So what he's saying is, Trump, it's okay. Come and rob my budget. Come and rob my preparedness, my readiness. Come and loot the military forces of the United States in the service of your grotesque, fascist, stupid wall. Right? A monument to your stupidity and your corruption, but Shanahan wants it because he wants to rack up some months, maybe years, as the boss of the Pentagon. So he's also the one. He's done two things for Trump today. He's working on the rationale for looting under the state of emergency, approving it, saying, yes, it is a military necessity, right? That's some of these things are. He's saying essentially Trump is right. These drills are too expensive. We can't have them. Well, this is appeasement, dear friends. This is we had appeasement in the Far East, right? There were proposals before Pearl Harbor to fortify Wake Island, to fortify Midway, to do more preparedness, to build a combat information center, a kind of, it was to apply the Dowding system of Britain, right? In other words, a filter room, a room where all the reports would be integrated on one big map. You've seen those in the World War II movies. So there were lots of proposals to do that to increase the defensibility of Hawaii, Midway, Wake, and so forth. And the Republicans voted against these things, right? Joe Martin, who later became the Republican leader in the House, he voted against it. No, that's provocative. Well, this is now the world of Trump. And, of course, too expensive. And too expensive is the shop-worn excuse by Trump. Now, Trump is in big trouble. He has given orders to people in the White House staff that daughter Ivanka and son-in-law Jared Kushner, the boy wonder, as we call him here, the boy wonder needed a top-level security clearance. Ivanka wanted one too. Trump gave the order. When all of the competent officials refused to do it, General Kelly, the former chief of staff in the White House, said no and wrote a memo to the file, which was then filed, we believe. And that memo says, I objected to this. And we also have the former White House counsel, McGahn, writing his own memo, which is why this is a bad idea, right? Somewhat less personalized, but in the same direction. And the interesting thing, of course, is that the busy journalists have got Trump and Ivanka both on record saying, no, Trump had no role. He didn't interfere in this at all. And whatever Ivanka and Kushner, the boy wonder, got was based on their own merit. Yeah, a democracy, a meritocracy in the White House. No, not even close. So that's another one. Now, Trump, of course, has the theoretical formal power to overturn these security clearances or grant new ones or do whatever he wants. But then it's when he starts lying about it and lying about his motives that he begins to get into political trouble. But maybe this week that's the least of his worries. Now, just a couple of things around the world. Remember, we've been working with this thesis that the Trump regime, a disastrous freak, a disastrous aberration of American history, is closely linked, and it was closely linked in terms of the people and the money and the ideas, closely linked to the Brexit in Great Britain. And we now are going towards a time here around the middle of March where we're going to get the final votes on Brexit, or we hope they're not final. We hope that they lead to a second referendum. In other words, a new vote to be able to put in front of people, here's what you're going to get if you vote for it, right? Not the wonderful idea, let's be free, let's repatriate everything, let's repatriate all of our government powers from Brussels, from the European Union. Now it's going to be, here's what it's going to give you and here's what it's going to cost. And we know the horrors, right? Body bags are being stockpiled. The military is ready to roll. We have plans to get the Queen out of Buckingham Palace and into some undisclosed location. All of that going on. So there are going to be 3 votes. I think we've gone through this on one of our programs during the week. There's one vote around, I think, March 12th, which is, do you accept the Theresa May arrangement, the deal, so to speak, negotiated by Theresa May with the European Commission? And a lot of the ultra-reactionaries don't like that because they say that's not reactionary enough. That's not crazy enough, not destructive enough. Then you'd get a chance to vote, if you're in the Parliament, on a no-deal Brexit. That is, of course, the most catastrophic of all scenarios. That would introduce chaos, confusion, economic dislocation, financial panic, God knows what, into the heart of the Atlantic system. And then the third one is, should we extend Article 50, which means the time frame in which all of this stuff has got to get done? The British Parliament, of course, could say, dear Brussels, we can't get this together, because there is no way to put it together. There's no majority for any form of Brexit. Doesn't work. What they could say is, dear Brussels, please prolong our time, right? We thought we had a deadline here, but we don't. And we know that this is gaining strength, right? We've had Jeremy Corbyn, the now increasingly sinister, not just confused or feckless or otherwise substandard, unacceptable, but now getting sinister. He now says, Corbyn says, that he will support a second referendum. Now, this goes against his entire pattern of treacherous, sneaky behavior up to now. Anyway, we have some observers say that the three votes around the middle of March that we've just gone through, I think it's the 12th, 13th, and 14th, we'll check the date, but that this is maybe not enough time in 10 days to convince some of the more backward Labour Party members, especially from the economically depressed areas of the north of England and a few places like this. There's maybe not enough time to convince them that they have to vote to block Brexit, right? To have a referendum, and that Brexit would be then called off because they somehow think that's what their voters want. So a couple of more things on this. We're determined to block Brexit. It's a disaster for the Western world, disaster for Europe, and, of course, a windfall for Putin and his gang in the Kremlin. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Mr. Tarpley coming at you from a slightly snowy Washington, D.C. So the goal is to stop Brexit, stop it in its tracks. This was an abortion worse than the Trump election. This was the Russian embassy. This was Cambridge Analytica. This was a complete monstrous manipulation by the London tabloids. Rupert Murdoch playing a leading role as a Brexiteer. We know why he did this, right? Rupert Murdoch is on record saying, if I go to Brussels and try to tell them what to do, they ignore me. But if I go to number 10 Downing Street and tell the British Prime Minister, they listen carefully and do what I say. So one big oligarch is not able to order around the Brussels Eurogorks and Eurocrats. Whatever else you may say about them, they don't take orders quite that way. Whereas in Britain, you can go to Tony Blair or whoever it is, certainly May today, and, what Rupert Murdoch wants is what they're going to do. So now, obviously delaying the Brexit machinery, right? It's better not to leap into the abyss today. If you can say, well, I'll leap into the abyss maybe, but only in 2 weeks or so. Good, yeah, that's good. That's progress. From the point of view of the ultra-reactionaries, unfortunately, it's not that way. And we have Boris Johnson, the pretty boy, right, the blonde former foreign secretary. He's a hardcore Brexiteer. He says that May is too soft, not reactionary enough, not apocalyptic enough. And because, of course, the apocalypse is needed because Brexit, dear friends, is an austerity program. It's a way to drive down wages, to deregulate working people, right? It's going to be the working people losing up and down the line. The Labour Party has a positive responsibility to warn those poor victims of deindustrialization in the north of England, saying, you're not going to get any benefits out of this. The benefits will accrue to the super rich predators and parasites of the city of London. That's who's going to make out like a bandit here. That's who wanted this. All right. According to the Washington Post of yesterday, the 27th of February, that is, hardcore Brexiteers fear And those who want to stay in the European Union hope that a delay in leaving might lead to the end of Brexit. Here we have reactionary, ultra-right-wing, xenophobic, jingoistic, conservative lawmaker Jacob Rees-Mogg, M-O-G-G. We know him as Jacob Sleazebog. Look that one up. Jacob Sleazebog, who says, "My suspicion is that any delay to Brexit is a plot to stop Brexit, and this would be the most grievous error that politicians could commit." Well, Brexit is a reactionary, ultra-right-wing, well, and worse, right-wing, radical, extreme, and so forth. You got to avoid it, right? A lot of people in the United States don't realize this is not some centrist, reform. This is crazy stuff. All right, and as I said, we've also got this hypothesis that Corbyn is still acting in bad faith. That he says, "Yeah, okay, you've convinced me that." I'll have these votes, and I'll use the whip apparatus, the whips, right, similar to the U.S. There are these people who go around and lean on the individual members of parliament saying, "You've got to stick with the party and vote for this, or you have no future. We'll deselect you in the future. You won't be on our list for your shire," or whatever it is. So Corbyn says, "Yeah, I'll do all that, right? I'll mobilize the apparatus of the Parliamentary Labour Party to do all this." But then there's another school of thought, which is that Corbyn is doing a version of what May is doing. May wants to get you to the eve of the deadline, March 29th, and say, "Aha, too late, out we go, crashing out, total chaos, ports shut down, airplanes crashing, body bags, no medicine, no food, chaos, but austerity, yeah, austerity." A police state, maybe that's the goal. There's no reason to rule that out, right? Every reason to rule it in. So that's what she wants. So maybe Corbyn is some similar version of that in his secret thoughts. Okay, so this is now where we are. It just shows populism is a disaster. Cultural populism is based on racism. There's also this question about, is the Labour Party somehow tending towards more racism than it had before because of this anti-European faction that they undoubtedly have that seems to be very influential with Corbyn. And indeed, Corbyn's, he's accused of anti-Semitism, and he denies it, but he somehow always manages, it's a little bit like Trump, right? Trump is accused of being a Russian puppet. He says, "No, I'm not." But then he acts like, well, some would say a Russian asset of some sort. So for Corbyn, it's this thing about, are you really an anti-Semite or not? We can't get into this entire thing here. But there is something strange about it. At the very least, he is a totally inept, bungling politician, unprincipled, and really should not be the head of the Labour Party, in the opinion of this well-meaning and benevolent outsider here on the banks of the Potomac. Now, other things going on in the world. Got to remember, we've got Netanyahu now accused of corruption and indicted, will be on trial before too long. So we're looking at that. We'll probably have more about it. Right? It's not like this was followed every day here, so we'll catch up with that issue. So now we are at the beginning of March. The other thing, of course, now that has happened this week, the riveting one-day testimony of Michael Cohen from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Wednesday. Wednesday had Cohen in the afternoon, and then Trump and his debacle, his diplomatic failure in the evening. Before we get to Cohen, though, we probably ought to remind ourselves that it is a relief that we got out of this Kim summit without something apocalyptic. Apocalyptic would be Trump says, all right, I'm fed up with South Korea. We're pulling out all the U.S. forces from South Korea. That would be apocalyptic. And we're cutting the Republic of China on Taiwan. You're on your own. Don't look to us. Fight your own battles. You're too expensive. You don't pay us. I'm Trump. And so forth, right? That would be the worst, or some of the worst possible outcomes. Or maybe there's another one, which is that Trump eventually realizes, maybe in the quiet of Saturday morning or Sunday morning, Trump will realize you have been humiliated, you are a laughingstock, you're one of the, you are the worst president because you're even a failure in the international area where Nixon had some things he could point to. At that point, what will Trump do? Will he have a manic flight forward? Will he attempt to engage in some kind of thermonuclear confrontation? Will he decide that Putin's baiting is intolerable? Right? Putin is saying, if you want a new Cuban Missile Crisis, we'll give it to you. We have all these missiles now that are better than yours. There is something to that because, unfortunately, the U.S. has wasted so much of the military substance on these stupid, idiotic, dead-end, conventional wars, counterinsurgency wars in the Middle East, whereas the Russians steered away from that and have put that strategic weaponry, superpower. Back in a minute. Second hour of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley, Ph.D., speaking to you from Washington, D.C. Now, we have to do a quick synthesis of the very lengthy Cohen testimony. First of all, let's thank Chairman Cummings of Maryland here, of the House Oversight Committee, Government Operations, Government Reform Committee, as it has been called in the recent past. It's a numerous committee, and it took all of them to go through the many crimes of the current individual one in the White House. Now, what we're aiming at, of course, is a reenactment of the Sam Ervin Committee, right? The Senate Committee of the spring and summer, especially of 1973, which was not an impeachment committee. It was actually the goal announced for the hearings, the legislative purpose then was campaign finance reform. Find out what happened in the 1972 election and draw appropriate conclusions for how to organize federal elections in the future, including the financing. But, of course, in the course of that, we got the John Dean testimony, which was the single most important blow against Nixon. We had Alexander Butterfield revealing the existence of the taping system by Nixon. We had Howard Baker asking, what did the president know? When did he know it? And so forth. So that's the Sam Ervin Committee. Up to now, we have not had members, veterans, ex-components of the Trump regime coming forward to talk about what they have done. And therefore, Cohen is the first step in that direction. And, of course, after him, we're going to have a whole bunch of others. And this is indispensable to educate public opinion on what kind of a person Trump is and what kinds of degenerates these current Republicans are. And especially in this context, let's point out that the Republican Party, we would say, has taken another giant step towards oblivion, towards extinction, towards its own extinction as a national political force. All of these Republicans, led by Jim Jordan, an outright hooligan, Mark Meadows, the hooligan with a little bit more decorum, Their stock and trade was nothing but slander, vilification, personal destruction rained down on the head of Cohen. All right, fine. So that's Cohen. But notice, there's no attempt to defend Trump. There's no attempt to say, well, Trump is honest, or Trump is virtuous, or Trump is our president and we owe him respect. There's none of that. Right? It's all this garbage. At most, what they have is this two-faced argument saying, oh, you should respect tradition. Tradition is that politics stops at the water's edge. Once the president leaves the country, goes overseas on official business, then you've got to stop attacking him until he comes back. That's the tradition. Yeah. And you came in as the enemies of all tradition. You are the destroyers of tradition. You hate tradition, custom, precedent, protocol. You hate all that. And now you're getting the fruits of it, right? Because if you don't have those factors working, then you're going to have, what you've had, and actually we need more of it. So the Republicans at the end of this thing are saying now, nothing about collusion. Fox News, where's the collusion? Trump, there's no collusion. Even Cohen admitted it. Well, you got to remember there was a division of labor here, folks. Tuesday and Thursday were collusion with Russia, steal the election, and all the rest of it. So if it's Wednesday, it has to be corruption, obstruction of justice, and tax crimes. So the poor Republicans, right, they know what they're doing there. Their position is so wretched. There is no defense for Trump. He's indefensible. And they, therefore, are reduced to saying, well, on this one day, which was set aside explicitly, the ground rules negotiated by the Democratic committee chairs were, today we have to have not Russia, but rather these other themes, right? The Southern District of New York State Attorney General, and related themes of that sort. So don't be fooled, don't be duped. There's plenty about collusion, but that went on in the Senate behind closed doors on Tuesday, and then in the House behind closed doors on Wednesday. Now, we're going to get a bunch of other people coming next week. We're going to get Felix Sater, who was the partner in negotiation for Cohen, right, trying to set up the Trump Tower in Moscow. And there's plenty of collusion, I can guarantee you. So therefore, the Republicans are grasping for straws. They hate tradition, and yet they want tradition when it suits them. Sater and collusion. Now, what's the big event? It is, and if you go, I would urge you to go to the Tarpley, Webster G. Tarpley Twitter site, and there you will see I assembled the headlines, the front pages of a certain number of prominent U.S. newspapers, and one of them, I think the most effective, the New York Daily News, which used to be right-wing way back when, but now has flipped. The New York Post has flipped in the opposite direction. But right now, the front page of the New York Daily News yesterday was checkmate. It's a picture of Cohen giving his testimony, gesticulating with his right hand, I guess it is, and above that is a picture of a check. And the one thing you can see about that check, please go to Webster G. Tarpley Twitter. You've got various versions of this, because I thought this was worth marking, right, and underlining the marking. A check written by Trump with his characteristic black Sharpie, pointy, some people say it looks like a stock chart, or it looks like an electrocardiogram. But it's a check for $35,000 from Trump or one of his entities to Michael Cohen, dated August 1st, 2018. That is part of the reimbursement of a payoff to Stormy Daniels, according to Cohen, and I think this is likely to turn out to be absolutely true. It is a part of a payoff scheme. It is an illegal conspiracy to circumvent the U.S. campaign finance laws. It is therefore a federal felony, a federal crime committed by individual one in the Oval Office. So in that sense, it's the smoking gun. The smoking gun, of course, in Watergate was one of the tapes where Nixon was caught scheming how to play the CIA against the FBI and vice versa to shut down the investigation. And this was a conversation he had with Haldeman, I guess, his chief of staff, in the first couple of weeks after the Watergate break-in. And when that became known to the public as a result of subpoenas in the first week of August, then that at that point was the doom of Nixon had been sealed, because he had told a lot of his Republican supporters that he had never done any such thing. So the Daily News, checkmate. There's Michael Cohen pointing to the check that he brought. Interesting article in Vanity Fair, if you've got time, how Cohen put this together. He realized he was going to have to testify. He was nervous, and he finally got the idea of going through some boxes of papers that the feds had taken when they raided him. There he found the check signed by Trump, smoking gun check. And he also found another one signed by Alan Weisselberg, finance boss of Trump Org, and Don Jr. So those are weighing heavily. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So when Cohen went through this stuff, he showed his documents, 2 canceled checks. Take a look at Webster G. Tarpley on Twitter. We've got them there. You should look at those, because those are turning points of modern world history. They are the first documentary evidence of crimes committed in the White House by the current tenant, and therefore are the stuff of which impeachment is made. Now, what would have to happen is the committee, I think it's enough if the committee votes, not even the whole House. The committee could then say, we're forwarding all this to Barr, the new Attorney General, saying, this is a criminal referral, you have to investigate this. What are you going to do? And at that point, Barr would be on the hot seat. You know that we have a very low opinion of Barr, having seen him in action with those infamous George H.W. Bush pardons of the December 24th, 1992, for such creatures as Weinberger, as McFarlane, and Elliot Abrams, and then the CIA 3, Alan Fears, Dewey Claridge, and one other. So that's the centerpiece. The smoking gun check. Prima facie proof of a felony. And that's what you've got now. So I'm sure there's much more to be said about it by the various legal pedants and legal cranks, but I think the essence of it is likely to stand in that way. Now, there are plenty of other problems here, and we can't really even get into a catalog. We'll try to give you a quick overview. There is no defense. Many have pointed out that the Republican Party is now nothing but a gang of thugs who run interference for Trump. And again, they can't say that's not his signature, or he'd never do that, or we've proven that that's not true. No, it's only, Cohen, you're a liar, Cohen, you're a felon, Cohen, you're going to jail, ha, 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 and so forth. Now, the people that Cohen has mentioned, the papers this morning are that, according to Schiff, at the House Intelligence, where Cohen spent all day yesterday, all day Thursday, that is, from our point of view. Cohen set a very rich table for the coming investigations. Yes, he did. And who's going to be cited? Well, the most popular is, of course, Alan Weisselberg, the chief financial officer of the Trump Organization. He was referred to 20 or 30 times by Cohen, based on a rough estimate. We've also got another guy by the name of Matthew Calamati, who's the chief operating officer of that same Trump Organization. He looks the part of a goon from Hollywood Central Casting. And he was named by Cohen repeatedly. And we've also got a couple of others. We mentioned Sater. And, of course, the big ones will probably turn out to be Don Jr. and Ivanka, who may also be called upon to comment. Others who may be called upon. Hannity. Hannity has said on his own broadcast that he has incontrovertible testimony that Cohen really is a disgruntled office seeker, that he wanted a job in the Trump White House. He didn't get it, and therefore the explanation for everything that Cohen is doing now is his frustrated ambition. So the big crimes, let's just go through some of them. The main one, the one that we're talking about here, a campaign finance violation, check for $35,000, a second check for $35,000 to Cohen, coming from Trump personally, and then also from Weisselberg and Don Jr. That is hush money for Stormy, and to the extent that can be proven that that is hush money to try to keep that off the front page before the election, that it was an election campaign expense, that puts you in violation of the federal election laws. Then there's this thing that Cohen said a couple of times, which was that the habitual practice of Trump was to inflate the values of his properties when he needed it, either for Forbes to get on the billionaires list as high up as he could get, inflate the values of property for Forbes, inflate them for certain kinds of insurance, we're told, and also then to deflate them when it's time to pay taxes, right? Lowball the estimates for taxes, highball the estimates for Forbes and other purposes, right? So this is done for each specific task, whether it was low, high, or whatever. This was done with a full cynical disregard for the actual law and for the reality. So that would be then the combination of tax fraud, if you lowballed it for the IRS, tax fraud, and New York State, in many cases. Insurance fraud, whether you lowballed it or highballed it, probably that's insurance fraud. And then bank fraud, if you're looking for loans, and apparently he was, a $1 billion loan to buy the Buffalo Bills, Trump at that point would have been highballing the values of these properties, and that would also then be a federal bank fraud rap. We had Maddow last night, a very interesting exercise in focusing on a mansion, Seven Springs in Bedford, New York. Right? That's up there in Westchester County. Right? Bedford, Armonk, Chappaqua. Right? It's Ocasio country. That's where she's from, too. Don't be fooled. The radical chic Ocasio. But Bedford, New York, so in 1995 it was worth $7.5 million. By 2013 it was $19 billion. It then was raised by Trump in 2012 to $291 billion. Boy, almost a third of a $1 billion for a nice mansion, and then back down to 25 to 50 million. And this would, of course, then be, if you gave a federal financial report with that on it to a bank, an insurance company, that lands you in felony bank fraud, felony insurance fraud, and, of course, felony tax evasion. Names mentioned: Weisselberg, Ron Lieberman, I think, and Matthew Calamati. Ask them, says Cohen. They were the money people. They know it. So, campaign finance violations, federal felony. Tax fraud, insurance fraud, bank fraud, federal felonies each. Perjury, when you're asked about this, you asked about this in writing, for example, for your federal financial disclosure forms. Yes. Obstruction of justice, because of that, false statements made to Congress, and self-opinion with Trump Foundation, also under attack by New York State Attorney General. So there's a whole new front in addition to Mueller. Actually, three of the documents that Cohen submitted were financial reports, financial condition overviews, not exactly a official government statement, but supposedly a summary of Trump's financial profile. If those had been given, for example, to Deutsche Bank, Deutsche Bank has been raided. For a while, Deutsche Bank refused to cooperate with the House Banking Committee under Maxine Waters. The word now is that the Deutsche Bank is cooperating. They have caved in. They're going to do what Maxine Waters wants them to do, and that may, again, rack up one of these bank fraud charges. So, it's an absolute proliferation of these charges. And by the way, we have, speaking of Deutsch, from Deutsche Bank, we want to turn our attention to Donny Deutsch. Donny Deutsch is a friend of Cohen, who happens to be one of the regulars and has been for quite a while on Morning Joe. He appears on Nicole Wallace in the afternoon, Deadline White House, and O'Donnell had him on this week. So essentially, Donny Deutsch is the darling of all the liberal Republicans. I think he's, formally speaking, a Democrat. But all the liberal Republicans of MSNBC think that Donny Deutsch is the cat's pajamas. Well, his line for several months has been that there's going to be a RICO case, racketeer influenced and corrupt organizations, because you've got, as I say, a proliferation of criminal possibilities, right? Charges, possible charges, investigations leading in so many directions that to just pick one or two of them does not capture the enormity of what's going on. And this is exactly the reason there is a federal RICO statute, right? We know there's civil RICO, but in this case it looks more like criminal RICO might be put into action. So at that point, Deutsch says that's what's coming. And according to O'Donnell and others, Deutsch has been saying that for quite a while. So, we have this interesting thing. Cohen says he was in Trump's office. His black speakerphone, Don's black speakerphone, was activated, and on comes the voice of Roger Stone. Roger Stone says, according to this account, I just got finished talking to Assange, and they're going to be dumping a lot of documents that are very harmful to Hillary. And Trump greets that with, that'll be great. Some positive valuation on that. You do get the idea. Trump had, I believe, said in written testimony, the written testimony given about a month ago to Mueller and company was that he had no advanced knowledge that the first round of stolen Democratic National Committee emails were going to be dumped there right on the eve of the Democratic National Convention. So all of that is now on the table. We are told that Cohen will come back to the Schiff committee next week. It's going to be next Wednesday, March 6th. He'll be back. Cohen has said that before he gave his perjured testimony to the Congressional Committee the first time, that was the offense that got him into the current predicament of a jail sentence hanging over him. He said that his statement was reviewed by some lawyers working for either Trump or the Trump family, I think Don Jr. These were Jay Sekulow and Abby Lowell, according to Cohen still, and that they went through and checked his testimony before he gave it. So that will also have to be thoroughly investigated. So some say that it's, let's see, we have different accounts of how many crimes are here. let's see if we can give you some of the leading ones, right? I've just given you a list, right? I think that was the MSNBC list. The Washington Post has an op-ed by Max Boot, neocon, struggling to make you forget that he's a neocon. And this was on the 27th of February. So what are the crimes? I think he gets up to 5. And let's see if we can reach the 5. Anyway, it's similar. And then there's even another one. There is David K. Johnson, who gets up to 14. Let's see if we can just summarize this. I don't know if he really reads them. Some of these, I think, are multiple counts on repeated crimes. He's trying to take the same stuff in various directions. Anyway, we've given you in the past that list of all the investigations of Nixon that were going on at the moment that he was forced out. And I think with Trump, it's going to be that way, too. So you've got the Schiff Committee, House Intelligence is attacking. You've got the Nadler Committee, House Judiciary attacking. Cummings, as you've seen, this was devastating, so that counts as attacking. Maxine Waters, the Banking Committee, extremely important avenue of attack. And we've got Congressman Neal, I think it is, the Massachusetts congressman who is the head of the House Ways and Means. They're the ones who have the undeniable a priori right to demand to see any tax returns in the entire U.S. system, because that is their job. So that's a big, big turning point, and what we think is most important is that this process has to continue. Trump cannot stop it. Trump can stop perhaps Mueller. He might be able to even stop the Southern District of New York, but he can't stop the New York State Attorney General, and he can't stop these congressional committees short of going outside of the law in some horrible way. How many times did you intimidate people? Cohen was asked by Congresswoman Speer. Was it 50? No, more. 100, 200, 500 was what they eventually settled on. So that's the kind of person he was. Now, Donnie Deutsch claims that he has reformed. We are from Missouri, right? We want to see it. So now that is a huge, huge step forward. It's looking much more like the Urban Committee. And a few more days like this, I frankly have to say, I don't see how Trump can resist this through this coming summer. I just don't see how he makes it to, say, the off-year election now in November. But now, in the meantime, what's going on with the Democrats? The Democrats are in considerable disarray. Let's see if we can sum this up. Remember, we talked to you in the past about the mistakes made by the Democrats in the Watergate and post-Watergate period, 74 to 76. This was a huge victory, biggest before now, or comparable to now, in terms of advancing in the House. And conditioning back House Democrats below it in 74 to 76. Back in a minute on World. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Our time is coming to an end now. This is our last segment, so what can we do? Apparently some bad blood in the Democratic House caucus. There's a group of moderates. The way you have to look at this is the media has created Ocasiona as the face of this new freshman class, but this is totally inaccurate. Ocasiona and Tlaib and Omar from Somalia, they're the ones who get on TV. But the majority of the 40 new members of Congress are surprisingly centrist, surprisingly moderate, because that's the way the recruiting was done by the party. Lots of veterans, lots of former government officials, not too many firebrands. So the media have taken the firebrand Occasiona, the Passionaria, and made her into the face of this. It's not accurate, and it's leading to problems. Occasiona has this demand, essentially abolish ICE. This is not realistic. This is simply crazy. This is political suicide. You want to purge them? You can purge them to your heart's content. You can fire them. You can put them on trial. You can do all that within the law. But the idea of having a country with no such border service, this is slightly ridiculous. This is a gift to the Republicans. It's just not serious politics. You've got to be a disciplined candidate and a disciplined office holder and not shoot your mouth off about various fragmentary ideas, because this is what Trump does. So 1974, a lot of Democrats come in. They think that they've been given a mandate on essentially on anti-corruption, fighting the problem you've seen with Nixon. Of course, there's some great things done. The Pike Committee in the House investigating the intelligence community, the Church Committee in the Senate, similarly, lots of corruption in the secret intelligence agencies. This is more or less Watergate as background, right, going back to the Kennedy assassination, the Bay of Pigs, and so forth. But they also forgot, what was it that the American people wanted in 1974 to 76? They wanted to resume the New Deal. The New Deal under Roosevelt, restarted under Kennedy and Johnson. And then when Nixon came in, it was aborted. The war on poverty was aborted. And once Nixon, Ford were out, the American people were waiting. The constituencies of the Democratic Party wanted to go back to the New Deal. And above all, they wanted an end to austerity. This is the alpha and omega of all of our wisdom. No austerity. Austerity is political suicide. Don't go for it. And that means wage austerity, fiscal tax austerity of the type that the Republicans might pursue against working people. It means no to austerity in the form of cuts to the social safety net. That means Social Security, and these are going to be issues, right? Social Security, according to the trustees, runs out of cash for full payment in 2033. This is now on the horizon. Very close. Medicare runs out of cash for full payments in 2026. In other words, if you get a two-term president elected now in 2020, that person will be in office through 2028. So under the second term of whoever gets elected, if that's the way it goes, you're going to have to solve the problem of Medicare. Now, we know that the oligarchs, the parasites, the austerity ghouls are readying plans to try to cut those things, to cut the social safety net. And who better to cut the social safety net than the Democratic Party? The Republicans have tried. They're afraid. They don't want to do it. It's the third rail, and it is. You will be destroyed. So the idea is appeal to the sense of civic responsibility of the Democratic Party and say, tax working people more and deprive the needy Social Security and Medicare beneficiaries. That's the issue going on now. So austerity right now is absolute poison politically, and of course in terms of economics, it's virtual genocide against key parts of the American people. Now, the Democrats have a bad track record, right? In 1974 to 76, American people wanted the New Deal, and who did they get? They got the most anti-New Deal Democrat in years, or ever at that point, Jimmy Carter, who regarded organized labor as just one of many special interests, right? And he didn't think they deserved any particular consideration, even though that was the heart of the old New Deal Democratic Party. So Carter came in, he acted out what? Energy austerity. He said, we're gonna unify the American people around energy austerity and high price of gasoline, expensive energy, and this is, of course, a form of austerity. Yes. And the result, Reagan took the presidency in 1980, and, of course, Carter had made things even worse by bringing in Volcker, and Volcker's 22% prime rate put the economy into a tailspin in the name of fighting inflation. Is that a kitchen table issue for most Americans? Inflation? No. If anything, it's welcome. It means that your debt weighs a little bit less heavily on you. And after that, as we all know, 80, 84, and 88, a generation of reactionary Republican control under stupid Reagan and the treacherous George H.W. Bush finally put an end to that in 1992. I would also remind people, in 2006, most Americans wanted Bush out, that is, Bush the younger, and they wanted the war to end. Now, once the dust had settled, it was clear that Bush the younger, George W. Bush, was not going to end the war. He was going to escalate it. He was going to have a surge. So at that point, the question was, if you wanted to end the war, you'd have to impeach Bush. And there we have the unspeakable Nancy Pelosi saying, no, impeachment is off the table. Well, put it back on the table, and put it back on the table right now. Right now, the one thing you can hope for is that this notion of impeachment can go through. So, remember, austerity is political suicide in our time. Austerity is where Trump comes from. There are a lot of identity group theorists who say, no, it's only racism. Only racism. Racism is the only beef coming from the blue-collar, unemployed, underemployed of the Midwest and the Rust Bowl and so forth. And we say no. There's been a period of austerity now going back, well, decades, but in particular since the crash of 2008, 2009, and Obama was so proud of his deficit cutting. Yes, the Satan sandwich, I think that was Congressman Meeks, that this was a Satan sandwich, and that's ultimately where Trump comes from. The energy that you see, or saw, maybe, hopefully, among the Trump supporters is the fact that they were being crushed by that austerity. Now, arriving on the scene, we have the media darlings. And again, it's Ocasio and others, right? Just call it Ocasio for the moment. Well, Ocasio, we read on the other, I think on this program or the other one, we have her program from the 2018 election, which was all about working people, human need. She comes from radical environmentalism. In other words, bait and switch. They ran, promising that there would be amelioration in the daily lot of working people. She has already dumped that proposal. She's now on the line of rich elitists and the Canoe Lovers Association and so forth. And she's not delivering. Just to sum it all up, we called on the Democrats, the first thing to do at the beginning of January, raise the minimum wage to $15 minimum, and provide for increases after that. Index it. They didn't do it. And this is now where we're going. We're headed towards radical environmentalism and campaign finance. That won't work.